So now I'm very happy to welcome Barbara Lake, who will talk to us about her experiences as an investigative reporter on the Inquirer and a number of other newspapers. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. So I decided I wanted to be a reporter when I was in high school. This dates me, but Watergate was going on or had just finished and or been exposed. And I thought, wow, what a great job to like really dig into powerful people. And you end up, I mean, those were, Woodward and Bernstein ended up, as you know, toppling a president. So I decided to do that. Most days it's a really, really fun job. And there are moments in my career where I've thought like, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this, even though we don't get paid a lot. But, and so I started in Clearwater, Florida. Back then, like you didn't label yourself an investigative reporter. I was just a reporter. And I still see myself that way. I don't label myself an investigative reporter, but, so usually when you start out, you cover everything. So you cover courts, you cover police, you cover anything breaking news. So when I was in Clearwater too, the Tampa Bay Bridge collapsed twice within a year while I was there. And my job one of them was to, there was a lone survivor in one of the bridge collapses and he was in a hospital. And my job was to go to the hospital and get the lone survivor. And I was like 21 years old. Okay. So I get to the hospital and by that point, like all the major media outlets were there. CNN, like you name it, they were there. And I'm this kid and I'm at the back of the room and it's packed full. And the lone survivor was in the ER in a room. And finally they wheeled him out and I'm at the back and I'm thinking, oh my God, like I'm going to not get this story and my editor's going to be pissed off and I'm going to feel like a failure. So what would I do? I got down on my hands and knees and I crawled between everyone's legs to get to the front of the room, not just the front of the room, but I poked my head up and my head was right near the survivor's head on the gurney and stretcher. And so I just, it's kind of like you use a lot of your natural instincts to get the story and to know what a good story is. So I'll give you some stories that have stayed with me over my career, because I think that might give you a better idea of what I do and how we work. So I was in Atlanta, I worked for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and then the Dallas Times Herald. I was at the Dallas Times Herald in the 80s when AIDS broke out. And, back then it was like a death sentence for people who got it. For one of the stories, I talked to a guy who set up the buddy program for all the AIDS patients, for all people dying of AIDS. He ended up getting AIDS himself. And I asked him if I could keep talking to him once or twice a week. And it was kind of understood he was going to die. Like he knew it. Everyone knew it. And he let me do it. And I became like a friend of his. It was weird because I was a reporter, but I saw him all the time. He was one of the most saintly people I've ever met. Didn't have an angry, bitter bone in his body. I was pregnant at the time with my first child and I still went to see him 8-9 months pregnant. And I remember so I ended up having Josh, my son, and Howie was his name, the guy dying of AIDS. And he said, oh, can you come to my house? I want to see pictures. I want to hear all about your son. And I went to his house and he was so sick. And I would actually help him go to the bathroom. It was I got close to him and not just physically, emotionally. And his mom came to visit him and his mom didn't want me there. And Howie said, look, Barbara's staying here. She's not only a reporter, she's my friend. And I did stay there. And Howie saw all the pictures of Josh and he was crying out of happiness. It was really stayed with me, that story. It wasn't investigative, but it was I learned a lot from that story. I learned, like, because we got hate mail after that story ran. It was 2 open inside pages. They put it like really big in Dallas. And I got hate mail from people saying, like, why did we devote so much time to someone who deserved to die? So the story stuck with me. Then I went to, from Dallas, I went to Seattle. My big story there was a mom who called me, and her son was was mentally slow. He wasn't like mentally ill. He was, mentally slow. And back then they had no places to put people who were struggling like that. So they ended up putting him, the state did, they put him in Western State Mental Hospital, which is notorious. There've been movies like with that at Western State Mental Hospital. And the mom told me that they were tying him up, and they were, he was becoming like animalistic, like because of the abuse that he got there. So she could go visit him, and I asked her if I could go with her, because if I called the hospital, they never let me in. And so I went with the mom, and we're both parents. And luckily, because I can't lie, if someone asks me who I am, I have to say who I am. I can't say like, I'm make up a name or whatever. And if people ask if I'm a reporter, I cannot lie. So luckily I went to the hospital, and before I could even get my word out, the mom said, Barbara's with me. She's a friend of mine. So I got in, and it was horrible what I saw, absolutely horrific. And I wrote the story, a series of stories. And one of the proudest moments of my career was we ran a series of stories, and then the state allocated millions of dollars to set up group homes for mentally handicapped people. And I went to see Aaron, was his name. I went to see him with his parents when he was in the group home, and he was like a changed person. He was the happiest young man. So it was very rewarding. Then I moved to Philly, and please interrupt me at any time or tell me if I'm rambling or going on too long.
And people may ask questions of Barbara, either in the chat or raising your hand. And if you unmute yourself to ask a question, please mute again after that. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Barbara.
That's okay. And so then flash forward to Philadelphia, and you may have heard we did a series called Tainted Justice, and it was about a group of narcotics police officers, a rogue squad, and they were doing horrible things. It started out as one officer was lying on search warrants when he was to get in drug homes. But it turned out this squad was really bad, and they would go to bodegas all across the city, the corner mom and pop stores, and they were run by hardworking immigrants who were all here legally, but the cops, like we found out later, they cased out which ones to rob. And they went into these stores, they cut the camera wires, they smashed the surveillance cameras and looted the stores. And that was investigative journalism, because the way we got a tip first from a drug informant, but he told us the officers' names of all the officers in the squad. And you can go to like a room in the courthouse where they house search warrants. So we went through every single search warrant where this squad was the one going to the homes. And so we first could verify the first story that he was lying on search warrants, because the drug dealers would tell us, it was kind of crazy. They were honest in a way, like they'd say, oh yeah, I sold heroin, but I sold heroin with a skull on the packet, not like, a gun or whatever. So that was the first one. But then we found out then we got a call from a lawyer who was representing a merchant in the city, a corner bodega store. And he told us about the squad coming in and cutting the wires, smashing the cameras, and because all these stores dealt in cash. So they took wads of cash, They helped themselves to sandwiches and drinks. They took batteries, cell phones, you name it. They stole it. They stole the stuff. And in the beginning, we started with 16. We found 16 store owners. We all talked to them separately. They didn't know each other. And we didn't ask them any leading questions. We just asked them what happened when the cops came in their store. And they didn't want to go on the record. I'm a stickler for people going on the record, especially when you're accusing people in power of wrongdoing or police officers. I think you have to come forward with your name. So at first they didn't want to, but we got 16. And so we went back to all 16. Wendy Ruderman was the other reporter I worked with on this. And we separated them out or divided them up. And we went back to each one and said, look, you're not alone. We have, 13, 14 other people saying the exact same thing. Will you go on the record? And they did. There was one officer in that squad who also pulled certain women aside during a raid and sexually assaulted them and fondled them. And that was really hard. I mean, a lot of stuff that we do, there's so much time that goes into it to get one person. So when we found out that this officer, they nicknamed him the boob man, actually other cops did. And so we knew his badge number. So we went back to the search warrant room and we pulled every single warrant with that badge number on it, meaning he was in the house. Then we divvied them up. There were hundreds of them. And then Wendy and I knocked on hundreds of doors and we asked people, sometimes the houses were boarded. And we didn't have a name of the person that we were, oftentimes we didn't even have a name of anyone, the people we were looking for. Oh, go ahead. I see a question. Let's see. Oh, no, they were not in uniform. They were, so the merchants believed that actually they were being robbed because these narcotics guys wear street clothes. And sometimes they have police on the back, but when you see them come towards you, you would not know they were cops. So they thought they were armed robbers. So anyway, so the way I found one woman was there was one block that this officer and his squad had raided like 5 homes. All 5 houses were boarded up. So I didn't even know who had lived there. I couldn't even find that out because a lot of the houses were rented, not owned. So I knocked on the door of one of the neighbors next to a boarded house. And this is like house number 357. That's how many houses. And I asked him if he was there when the house next to his was raided. And he said, yes. And I said, was a woman there? And he said, yes. And I said, did anything unusual happen? And he said, well, come to think of it, yes. Like after the cops left, she was crying on her porch and she said something horrible had happened to her. And I said, and his name, like kind of ironically, was Angel. And I asked Angel if he knew her name and where she'd moved to. And he knew her first name. And it was a Friday night. He got on the phone for like an hour, like calling all around for me to try to find where she had moved to. He found where she'd moved to and he found her or at least the address. So he gave me the address. I drove over there and it's like 8:00 on a Friday night. And I knock on the door and her name was Dagmar and Dagmar wasn't home. She was out with her fiance. And I asked her cousin if I could wait until Dagmar got home. And she said, yes. So I'm waiting outside in my car and Dagmar rolled up and she got out of the car and I walked up to her and I told her who I was. And I said, I'm here to ask you about what happened during the raid on blah, blah street. And she just started crying and she held out her arms to me. She gave me this big hug and she said, I've been praying for this day, because she had reported it to the district office and district police office and no one had done anything. Um, and they kind of, all these women, they didn't take seriously. And so there are moments where you just think, and that was one huge moment where I thought, this is why I'm a reporter, because, so many times people will, especially in poor neighborhoods, they will try to like raise their hand and say something happened, it was horrible. And they go to the right authorities, but sometimes they're not heard or they're not taken seriously. And so to me, like one of the best things about being a reporter is if I can find that person and that person's willing to talk to me and tell me what's going on and trust me. A lot of this is people have to trust me. And so I often tell like young reporters, like, I don't care if anyone has like an 8th grade education or less or whatever. People can tell if you're honest and whether you're genuine and you really care about them and you're not just doing a job. And they can tell by your eyes, the way you talk to them, the questions you ask, your responses to them. And what's another big story that was chilling for me was my editor sent me to the middle of Pennsylvania, in the middle of the state, to a small town, like where Walmart was the only industry. And you couldn't get, there were no like real, like there was nothing really there. It's in the middle of nowhere. And the reason he sent me there was a young girl, Kimmy, who was mentally slow, and a group of kids had taken her to down a hill, a wooded area called Gallows Harbor. And there were 2 ringleaders, like a girl and a boy, girlfriend, boyfriend. And they took this girl, and at first they put a collar around her like a dog and dragged her around. And then they hung her from a tree. She fell to the ground, and she gasped for air. And the main girl took a rock, hit her in the head with the rock, killed her. And all the 2 kids, the 2 main kids, and the kids who watched, all left out of Gallows Harbor and like just left, and nobody stopped these 2 the girl and the boy. And so I didn't know how big the story was when I got there. It was in Clearfield, Pennsylvania. So first I found the victim's parents, and not one reporter had been to their home. And they invited me in, and I first asked, like, tell me all about Kimmy. And, I didn't have the opportunity to meet her. So they spoke for about 2 hours about Kimmy and then told me what happened. And sometimes in this job, you have to ask really like very difficult questions or difficult asks from people. And I knew I wanted to see Gallows Harbor. And I asked the dad if he felt like he could take me there. And he did. The next morning, just the dad and me, we went down and he showed me where it happened. He walked me all through it. I found the coroner, and the coroner, it was her first and only murder that she'd covered. And then I had to find out all about these kids, because it fascinated me or haunted me that these kids, not just the main doers, but the other people there, didn't stop it, didn't do anything. And I found out that after they left Gallows Harbor, they go up to a main road, and a woman gives them a ride into town. And so all these kids were in that car. So I needed to find that woman. I found her house, and she wasn't there. And finally one night I'm like leaving her house, and I see a car driving in the opposite direction, like headed there. And I thought, something tells me that's her. And sure enough, it was her. And because I needed to I needed to know the mood of the kids, what they said, what they didn't say, how they acted in the car. And then I went to they had a county fair. I went to the fair and met all these kids and adults who knew these children. And they filled in like the head boy had killed rabbits. She had collected stray cats and drowned them in a river. Like they were very demented, troubled kids. And so the way I like to put together a story is because I wasn't there and I didn't meet Kimmy. So I like to get all the pieces from everyone so I can write it narrative style like a book. And you can only do that if you have a ton of details. So I remember I started the story with something like, because it was Mother's Day when she was found. And the dad, Kimmy's dad, had just picked up like some roses from Walmart and was driving home to his wife for Mother's Day when they found out that Kimmy had been found. So when you find out little details like that, and the only way you get those details is by getting people to trust you and by spending a lot of time with people, and let them just talk, and then and ask hard questions to fill in all the blanks and know like the order of the questions you're going to ask so you don't turn people off or scare them away. Because you don't start with the real hard ones at first, because it would turn people off. It would turn me off if I was asked like a real difficult question early on without knowing the person. And then our most recent series we did was called Toxic City, where we actually we enlisted teachers to at public schools in Philadelphia. And because we wanted to test for asbestos and lead and other toxins in the public schools. And a kid I met had been severely lead poisoned in a Philadelphia school because the lead paint was peeling from the ceiling and landed on his desk, and he swallowed the chips. And so we couldn't get access to the schools. We couldn't just walk in and take stuff or take pictures of anything. So we enlisted teachers. We learned how to test. Wendy and I learned how to test for asbestos and lead and what kit we had to put together. So we put together all these kits and with instructions, and neither of us covered public schools. So we had to go to meetings and word of mouth and talk to teachers to see if they'd be willing to do it for us. And we found 19 teachers who were willing to go into the school like in secret and test for what the way we wanted it tested for asbestos and lead and all that stuff. And we found like super high dangerous levels of all these substances, including asbestos and lead and so forth. So that was kind of a unique way of doing a story because it was science, but we involved a lab. We had to drive all the stuff out to the lab to get tested. And, we had to find people willing to basically put their jobs on the line to help us. And they were teachers who were very concerned about the children's health, and that's why they were willing to help us. I see another question. Oh, thank you. That's really sweet. I found like recently, because there's a big backlash right now. Everyone hates reporters and the media. And I think it really mushroomed with Trump, with the fake news and everything. And also because people can anonymously attack you on social media and every which way, emails, they can just like call you names and everything. And I have been threatened. So people always ask me that, and yeah, I have been threatened. And so it's always nice to hear somebody just say, thank you for what you do. It means a ton to us. So I really appreciate it when people say that, because we don't get paid a lot and it can be a thankless job. So it's always nice to hear a thank you.
Lots of questions. I think, Joanna, you had one? No, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I see one hand.
If you have a question, unmute yourself.
I was merely sharing that or adding my thanks and appreciation. I was applauding whoever said thank you for the things you do. And I think it's one of the most valuable jobs happening right now. And I think you're doing wonderful stuff, really wonderful stuff.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot to us. Like, really, it means a lot to me. And I know my colleagues too, because it's, it really, we often don't get a lot of feedback from like editors. So it's always nice because we work for the public. So it's always nice when we hear from the public that, you appreciate what we do.
I do actually have, well, sort of a topic that I'm just wondering about. I'm wondering about, say, for instance, in the business with the schools, what kind of feedback do you get from the school district? The same way I'm wondering what kind of feedback you get from the FOP,
Well, the FOP, after we did this.
But no, I trust you'll address those.
Yes.
Thank you.
So the FOP, which if for those of you who don't know, it's the Fraternal Order of Police, the police union. So after we ran the first story of Tainted Justice, John McNesby, who's still head of the FOP, he held a giant press conference, and we thought it was to address the story, but it wasn't. It was to attack Wendy and me. And he said it's like, I'll never forget it. He said something like, the only thing lower than a drug informant is a Philadelphia Daily News reporter. So after that story, we got, they used to have a website. Some of the cops had a website called Dome Lights. And they went on there and they said horrible things. They said like that they wished Wendy and I got raped and beaten and called 911 and no one would come. They wished we got set on fire. They wished horrible things on us. And then we were also followed, like, because we had to work really late on the stories. And at that point, we were at the bigger building at Callow Hill and Broad. And our garage was across the street where we parked. And so Wendy and I would leave really late. And sometimes there'd be a car just sitting at the stop sign. And it would have like an FOP sticker on the back. It wasn't like a marked car, but we knew. And they would follow us. And we got like all these hang up calls, like people told us we better watch our back. Like it was scary. We weren't, people ask like, who scares me the most, like who scared me the most. I have been threatened on another story by a drug dealer after I wrote stories about this one drug corner at 25th and Sargent in Philadelphia. And he threatened me. And so drug dealers scare, if you're threatened by someone who is in the business of carrying guns, like that scares me. And police officers have scared me, but like, not that, like we had so many good cops help us on this series. We couldn't have done it without good cops who wanted to shed a light on what bad cops were doing. Because it's like a bad reporter who makes up stories. It hurts me and hurts all other good journalists out there because people want to lump us all together. But cops have scared me and still do. I was recently threatened on another story by a police officer. And it's scary because you know that they can find out where you live very easily. And some of them are very brazen and think they can get away with doing something to you and nothing will happen. But it's part of, I guess it's part of what we do. Like if you do hard-hitting stories and you are causing pain to people, even if they deserve to be charged or whatever, it's unsettling to know that, someone can threaten you or they want to do you harm. But it's part of the job. It's not if you do like, you're a food critic. I don't think, but who knows? Maybe a restaurant owner would like threaten Craig Laban for a bad review. I don't know, but so it's mostly a very challenging job, but very rewarding. And but it's not the easiest one you could pick.
How much support do you get from the editorial staff of the paper? Do they suggest things to you ever, or suggest that you not follow up on a story?
So you mean our editors, not like the opinion people? Okay. Well, my editor on Tainted Justice, Gar Joseph, I loved him to death. He died of glioblastoma a few years ago. And he was a sweetheart of a man, like he was a gem. But he would tell us when we're doing Tainted Justice, for example, like we'd already included in the story about how the cops, when they raided homes, they would take PlayStations from people and they would take other stuff out of their homes and or pocket some of the cash. And we were going to do more on that. And Gar, was very smart, with a heart of gold, he told us, he was very plain speaking too, and he just told us, like, look, you guys, you've already established that. You don't need to keep hammering that same thing. Go to a new topic. And he was right. Most of our ideas are reporter driven on the investigative team. Like there'll be some that they want you to do, like the big one now is that boy in the box story. They want us to find out, like, confirm who the biological dad is and the biological mother and who killed the kid. We have like some theories, but we don't, like, the officers and the people who worked that case are keeping the names very close to the vest. So, but that's something where they want, and they expect you to get it like quickly. And sometimes you can get stuff easier than you can other times, like that. What was that other one recently? The 12-year-old boy shot by the cop when he was, where was that? South Philly. He was 12 years old and he shot into the car and then ran, but he didn't have the gun at the time. That was one I worked on and got, like, you can sometimes get, when you have cops who trust you, they can slip you information or documents or paperwork when their name isn't attached to it. And that's like something we do a lot, like, but it's something where you have to have a good reputation, because you can never, if you burn someone, you're done. So if I tell someone your name isn't attached, I just had a conversation today with someone who's a source of mine. And I said, like, as always, your name isn't attached. And she's worked with me for a long time. Like, she knows. It's like, there's a trust there, because you cannot burn someone like that, because it not only hurts your relationship with that one person, it hurts it hurts you with a lot of people, because especially in a world like in the police world, all they have to do is pick up the phone and ask a friend of theirs, do you know this Barbara Laker? And if you burn someone or not been truthful, then they won't talk to you. So, it's like anything. You just have to keep your word, and because your word is all you have. And my word is my word. Like, if I tell people their name isn't in the story, or I never tell, like, where I got something, like sometimes my editor needs to know the position, like the job the person has, so they know that it's someone with direct knowledge of the case and not gossip. But that's where it ends. Like, nobody knows, like, who I'm talking to. In fact, in Tainted Justice, I had two different sources who sat real close together, and neither one of them knew that the other person was also my source. Like, that's how tight it is. And so you just have to, Wendy and I would chuckle about that because it's kind of funny, but yeah, they still to this day don't know that they both were talking to me.
You have two questions in the chat, and I think one question from Carol not in the chat. So,
what has been the impact on your family? Well, I have two grown kids, But when I did Tainted Justice, my both kids were in college. So I often did not tell them the details of what I was going through at the time. I didn't tell them about the threats until later that they were over. I keep a lot of stuff to myself or talk to my friends, or like Wendy, who was my partner in a lot of these stories. She and I had each other. I would tell my editor, but you don't want to, because people think you're a little nutty. Like they think you're doing something really dangerous. Like one time, I mean, I'm divorced now. I wasn't divorced because of this job, but at one point I was going on drug raids with cops, and they told me I needed a bulletproof vest. So I went to a gun shop and bought a bulletproof vest for $750 that the company paid for, but I had to put it on my credit card. And so I went home. I wasn't even thinking like that's an odd thing, or that's a weird thing or a dangerous thing. And I just told my ex-husband, I said, oh, by the way, if you see $750 on the Visa, don't worry about it. I'm going to get reimbursed. And he said, what's it for? I said, oh, it's just a bulletproof vest. And like, he flipped out. Like, and when you think about it, that is a flip out kind of thing. Like you think, here, your wife is running around with a bulletproof vest. Like, what are you doing that you need a bulletproof vest for? So, yeah. So for my kids, because those are the main, I want to protect my children, and they do worry about me. And so if there's threats and stuff, I often, like I said, I don't tell them until the threat has passed. And I know, they're not going to come get me, or, I don't tell them a lot of stuff that I've done.
There are two more questions in the chat.
Okay.
Any thoughts about how one would proceed with the Iowa College campus murders?
Well, I think they've done all this already. Like, I think the reporters have talked to like the two other people who were in the house, who, it sounds weird, but they were asleep during the whole thing. But they've cleared them. I think you'd have to, to be a reporter on that case is really hard, because those kind of stories are media circuses, meaning that you have like everyone there and everyone's competing for the same story. And so I always tell myself, if I'm on a big story like that, like I did the TWA 800 crash in New York, and I had to go to Montoursville, that town in Pennsylvania where all those kids were from and died on the plane. And my editor told me, he said, you've got to get me stuff that no one else has. Well, everyone was there, the New York Times, the Washington Post, you name it, CNN. And so what I did is I got a list of they did, I think at some point, say which families, like the families who were, who'd lost someone. And so I just went from house to house. I found out where they lived, and I went to house to house to house to house until I got like an exclusive, and I got an exclusive that way. You just have to move real fast on your feet. Those murders, it's the same kind of thing where you'd have to find out, you'd have to talk to everyone who was friends with the kids who died and try to, like what the cops are supposedly doing, like retrace the steps from like, 2 weeks for the previous 2 weeks, and find out everywhere they went, who they talked to. Like, wasn't there one, they were saying at first that one of them they thought was being stalked, but then that was like dismissed. So I don't know. It's a hard one, because I don't know how good the police are there. I don't know. Like, it seems a little odd that they don't have more yet, but I don't know, because we don't even know if it was someone they knew or someone they didn't know. And that's why so many kids are scared and parents are scared. But yeah, that's how you do it. You'd have to you'd have to be like a detective.
And Myra is asking, what you think of the movie She Said, if you have seen it.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen that movie. Yeah, I mean, what do you guys think? Or who asked it? Like, what did you think of the movie?
Myra?
I asked it. I sort of assumed that you would run out and see it. It was very good. That the reporters are, really heroes, and it shows some of the things that you're talking about. The way that how hard it is sometimes to get people to go on the record.
Yeah.
And how much sympathy the reporters have for their informants.
Yeah, I mean, I'm indebted to them. Like, I think, I mean, the two of the three women who were assaulted by the cop, they not only went on the record, they did videos for us. And that takes real courage, especially one of them was threatened. I mean, the courage that people have, I really admire. And I think that in their case, and I probably with the women and She Said, you have to always think, well, what would the motive be for them to talk? And in a lot of sex assault cases, or where women have been molested or attacked or whatever, especially by people in power, I think it's their way of taking control of their story and kind of removing the power from the bad person. And because whenever I'm trying to convince someone to talk to me, I always think like, why would they want to talk to me? And then I know how to approach them. Like, and each case is different, but if you think that way, like I always put myself in the position of the victim and think like, why would I want to talk to a reporter and get my story out there? And often it is that. It's like the women, I stayed in touch with them and they felt empowered. They felt like people heard them, and kind of like, the She Said thing with Weinstein. It's like, or the Cosby story. It's the same thing. It's like they feel like finally they're heard and someone listened to them and believed them, and justice can be served. And that's often the motive. Now, when I'm talking to, say, someone in the police department who may have information that I want, I think, well, why would they want to talk to me? So one of them, he was a high-ranking police official, and they were looking for one of the women, and I didn't know her address, and he did. So it was kind of a weird dilemma. So he wanted help. Like, this woman didn't want to talk to the police, but they were more trusting of a reporter. So he said, look, he said, I can't give you the address. And I said, well, how about if I give you 4 addresses and you just like nod or don't say a thing when I give you the right address. And that's what he did. He didn't say a thing, and I knew the address. And then he asked me, he said, if you find her, can you convince her to talk to internal affairs? And so that's a completely different motive. But everyone who you want to talk to you always think like, why would they want to? And then I know how to approach them.
Barbara.
Hi.
Hi. I'd like to add my thanks to others for what you do. It's fantastic that you put yourself out there and even in danger to do this public service. And I don't know how many times I've seen, like, after a report by the Inquirer or whatever paper, some action was taken on something. So it's always great to see that. I know one area where the papers and everyone else have had a hard time, such a hard time, is like with the FOP and the arbitration system, putting cops back on the street who shouldn't be back on the street. And like, are you working still on those issues as you address other things, like over the years? Are you still working on the police problems?
Yeah, we did. In fact, we have a follow coming up before the end of the year, but we did a series this year called MIA, Crisis in the Ranks. And it was about the cops. You can go out injured on duty when you're a cop, and you don't have to pay federal and state taxes. So you actually get a raise to be out. You're not supposed to work another job. And it's supposed to be a short amount of, like, you can't be out for years. And we found people who were totally scamming the system, cops who were scamming the system. One had a roofing business, two had a linen business, and they were working while they said they were injured. And it was actually kind of fun to report because it took surveillance. Like, we had to be outside the linen place for like hours to get pictures of them to prove that they were working another job while they were out injured on duty. Now, Mike Nesby, who heads the FOP, he will not talk to me. He will not answer a text from me. So if we need a comment from the FOP, another reporter has to reach out to him, which is fine. Like, I mean, it's silly because it's going to go in the story anyway, but so be it. He has an issue with me, so that's fine.
I mean, you've proved over and over and over again, the corruption that exists, and it seems like such an intractable problem. Although something that gives me hope is like I remember being in Philadelphia, like starting like in the late 70s and early 80s, when the Italian mafia just seemed, undefeatable, and they're like nothing now. So it's like some really powerful groups do get justice in the end, and I hope it happens.
Okay.
What?
I have been impatiently waiting a long time. Barbara, I have two questions. One of them has to do with, I was thinking about when you talked about going to find the families of the kids who had been killed in the plane crash. And I always feel uncomfortable at the reporters who hold the microphones up to the faces of people who have just suffered great tragedy. And I would think that there must be a lot of thinking or self-analysis when you have to deal with crossing the line, well, not crossing the line into making someone's grief worse. And that's the first one. And the second one is, I'm noticing that you seem to be working with a man named David lately, quite a bit. But for most of the stories you were telling us about, you were working with Wendy. And I'm very intrigued by the fact that I have a feeling that people are probably more likely to talk to a female. And I'm wondering if your being a woman made a difference.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I get asked that a lot. So your first question, yes, sometimes you feel, well, all the time, I feel terrible knocking on people's doors who've just lost someone. And some people will slam the door in your face. But I found, for the most part, that people want to tell you, they want people to know the person in their life who died. And so they want to talk about that person, and they want the world to know who that person was, because I'm never going to meet that person, but I can describe who they were and kind of, in a way, bring them to life if I know who that person was, with anecdotes, with all the stuff that people can tell you. And so that's that's why somebody would want to talk. And yeah, I get that it's really hard, and sometimes you feel like a vulture. You feel like it's the worst part of the job, when you, especially to me, like the worst thing that could happen to a human is to lose a child. So, so when I go up to someone's door and they've lost a child, you know, my heart's in my throat, like I'm just a mess. And if they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk. But I think for the most part, like when I was in Montoursville, most every family wanted to talk to me. I mean, one father, I remember, he said he used to sled down a hill near his house with his daughter who died in the plane crash. And he said he went up there the other day just to feel closer to her. And I asked him if he was going to, you know, does he do that every day? And he said, and I asked if I could walk with him, and he wanted me to walk with him. And because he wanted me to share, he wanted to share his daughter with me. And so I do find that that's like a motivation for some people to talk, but some don't want to talk. And I think, you know, God forbid something like that happened to me. Well, I don't know how I'd feel at that moment. I think also it's often the moment that you get someone that, you know, because, you know, grief, it's like it comes in waves. So you can approach someone 1 minute and 2 hours later, they don't want to talk. Or I'm not TV, so I'm less intimidating than someone who's with a TV camera right there. And I do think being a woman has helped me, definitely helped me, because I mean, when I was like tracking down all these drug dealers, I think if I was a guy, I think drug dealers would be less apt to talk to me. I think with sex assault victims, I think they're more apt to talk to me. But I also think it's your approach, not just your sex. And I mean, I'm not I don't think, you can tell me, I don't think I'm an intimidating looking person. And I always do this thing, and it works 99% of the time. I knock on someone's door, they open the door, and I stick out my hand and I say, "Hi, I'm Barbara with the Inquirer." And they don't slam the door in my hand. It sounds so simple, but 99% of the time I'm in the house that way. So it's a human connection. That's all it is. It's one human being connecting to the other. And so if you're scared to talk to people, or you're too frozen to talk to someone who's lost someone, you shouldn't do this job. You know, it's like I'm not super smart, but I'm people smart. And so I use what I have to benefit me and be the best reporter I personally can be. But yeah, I do think we get asked that a lot. And I do think, as far as the woman part, and I think in some stories it really helps. Now, there's a flip side to it, like that good old boy network. Like I can't enter the, you know, if like you want to play golf with our guy's a golfer or whatever, like there is that good old boy network where it's easier for a guy to get into. So it just depends. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Myra had raised a question earlier with me, and she's not asking it now, so I will ask it for her. How do you see the future of investigative reporting as newspapers are being consolidated and closed?
Well, I think it's a very scary thing, because I think that like our investigative team has shrunk. I mean, luckily we have the Lenfest Foundation, which is the nonprofit, but they don't pay our salaries. And I think in this age of like newspapers are in panic mode, other than like the New York Times and the Washington Post, they're in panic mode because we're losing money, we're bleeding money, and people aren't buying newspapers. And we tried to get everyone to switch to digital, but we gave it away for free for so long. People don't want to pay for it, and they find a way around it. And so they're grabbing at straws. So like every morning they send us a list of the stories that got the most clicks, and then the stories that got the most, what they call conversions, which means that if someone read your story or clicked on your story and then decided to subscribe, so they credit you with a subscription. They now have, in some, not in the I team, but in most departments at the newspaper, they have story quotas. The whole industry has changed. And I think a lot of us are mourning the older days, or the days when newspapers were in the heyday. And it was a lot more fun then. And there was a camaraderie, there was excitement. We felt like we were, taking down the bad guys as a team. And it's just not as fun. So, and that's, to me, is sad. I mean, I'm glad that I got to do it when, it was in its heyday and all newsrooms were filled and there was all this chatter and it was a, very fun place to be. But because everyone in management, I think, is scrambling to find out a way to save the paper, it's hurt us, because I don't think management will be happy me saying this, but I think that in my mind, if you just do good journalism, then things will fall into place. And I don't think that's the thinking right now. And if you look at some of the stories that do well online, they're like, oh, what was the one today? Oh, they did a rewrite on like that whole, Good Morning America cheating scandal thing. You know what I'm talking about? The two anchors who had an affair. So someone just rewrote like what the drama was about, and that got the most clicks. That isn't journalism. That's like just rewriting something. And there was another one. It was like, oh God, what was it? It was nonsense. It was like, and you just think, oh my God, if that's steering the ship, like, the number of clicks, because people click on silly stuff. They just do. And we have no control over it. And like our missing in action story got a lot of conversions. We were lucky there. But some stories that we do don't get as much clicks as like that GMA scandal. And it's just, it's depressing. It's upsetting. But yeah, I think investigative journalism is is in a tough spot. Like you see all the nonprofits that are doing, like ProPublica is doing well. Those kind of organizations are doing a little better, but really, like, this whole industry is in dire straits. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, it's really bad.
See, our time is up. We've past an hour, and we thank you very, very much. I think everybody was excited and learned a lot about what you did.